guys are like so energetic first thing in the morning, I couldn't even tell if the mic was on. That's amazing. Yeah, I was just about to tweet that I was going to start this, but I had to stop. That's okay, this talk is more important. Anyways, everyone in this room today right now, even though we just are kind of maybe tired from dancing with sharks and octopus, just one octopus, not octopi, getting down to Africa with sharks last night, we all have the power to change the way our industry thinks about animation on the web. All of us right now, I'm totally serious. I'm 1,000,000,000% sure of it, and I never ever exaggerate. Totally true. We have the power and the tools to create animation that is true to the web finally, like actually really true to the web. It like works in browsers properly and doesn't do weird extra stuff. We can make animation that's purposeful and beautiful and even like accessible. We can make animation that's progressively enhanced and responsive. Like what other medium can say that? None of them. We are the best medium. That's how this goes. So we have all this power, but we're kind of afraid to use it a lot of the time, right? Like we can do all of this stuff. We're like, oh, I don't know. I don't really know how to use it. I don't know if we should. And I think we should use more animation on the web, that we should take animation and basically give it its credit as the list of design tools we have to do awesome web work with. But a lot of people think more animation on the web means we're going to have an entire internet of stuff like this. Which, if you're not familiar, I took a little video of this site. If you're wondering what's happening, I'm scrolling to read more of the site. Scrolling down, and things are like, blah. And then I'm like, I don't even know what's happening anymore. And then I get to do it all again to go back to the top. That was fun, right? So like, more animation on the web does not have to mean stuff like this. It could mean stuff like this, but it doesn't have to. It can also mean things like Stripe checkout, which I'm sure you've seen a bunch if you've ever renewed your Dribbble Pro account or like bought fancy design stuff on the internet. They tend to use Stripe checkout a lot. And there's a lot of animation going on in this Stripe checkout process. Like your entire step through it, your whole way of going to buy for your Dribbble Pro account or whatever else, you saw a ton of animation. And honestly, the difference between this example and the amazing GoChat experience that we had isn't the number of animations, it's the way they're designed and the way they're considered. The ones that Stripe uses have purpose and they have style, they've been designed. The ones on GoChat were just kind of like, hey guys, we can make stuff spin, check this out. And it was just that over and over and over. And the Stripe people were probably like, hey guys, check this out. But they were doing it in a different way. They're like, hey, I made this like actually feel really fluid and natural, and I created animations that help you get through the payment process, and you're happy at the end. And most people don't even notice those animations, which is a good thing. So the best animations, the best interface animations are ones that have both purpose and style. That's the kind that are in Stripe. That's the kind we want to make, because that's where the power of this is, of actually designing them, of finding a purpose for the animations, and then making them look really good. Because if you only have half of that, like if you find a place where you're like, animation is going to be awesome for giving feedback in this exact case, and then you make it like hideously ugly, it's not actually going to help anymore. Because people might be like, yeah, I saw that, but oh my God, what is going on? It's like, it just loses its, you can counteract the purpose by having terrible style or no style. Today I'm going to talk mostly about how we can give animation style and actually look at animation from basically a motion design perspective, which is a little different for most of us on the web. But if you're interested more in the purpose, or purpose as well, you can check out this article I wrote for A List Apart that also has a really cool horse with 1,000,000 legs. It's like an octopus horse. Actually, that's more than 8. Never mind. But today I want to talk about animating with style, because I think that's one part where, being that we're web designers and not motion designers, we just have a big gap of knowledge. We don't know this stuff. We've never had to know this stuff. And it's really not that hard. It's actually kind of easy. We can fake it really easily. All the design decisions that are behind animation, the design decisions behind animations that look really good and are like a pleasure to use, or are so good you don't even notice them until there's someone on stage pointing to them, the style behind those is all driven by classic motion design principles or the principles of animation. And there's two things we can gain from these principles that I think are really, really important. As much as these animation principles were written for a time, like basically in like the 30s to 80s, when like a bunch of old men in Disney, and it was all old men because Disney didn't like women, but whatever. He's cool. So it's a bunch of old guys like hand drawing a bunch of characters on these like cell things and stacking them up for a camera. Very different from the kind of work we do. We're not making films. We're not making dancing brooms. But they did really get down to the core of what makes animation look good, and we should want to do that too. So it can give us a better understanding of the craft of all this stuff that's come before us, and it expands our vocabulary. It gives us a way to talk about animation that makes us sound like we actually know what we're talking about, and having like real words instead of strange sound effects, though you will find out I am a fan of sound effects. So those principles of animation came from Disney. Most of them were in this book here called The Illusions of Life. It's a giant book. It smells like old library. It's really, really great if you're into reading books. For anyone who doesn't know, books used to get printed on paper. It's a thing. But conveniently, if you aren't a paper book person, the 12 principles of animation, which are the main things that came out of this book, or the main thing we took from this book is the 12 principles of animation. And they are all actually really well summarized in a Tumblr as well. So this Tumblr pretty much summarizes those actually really, really, really well. But the book itself has these 12 principles of animation. And just to prove that they're in the book, this is what they look like. A little different than the Tumblr version, right? Like, it's not as fun. This is just a list. And a lot of the times when we're presented with this list, it's like in an article about, here's how all 12 principles can exist in CSS or something like that, which is great. And it's good to see and good to know. But we don't really think about like the fact that all 12 of these don't really apply to us equally. Some of them are more important than others. Some of them we can get a lot of use out of, and other ones don't really apply to us anymore. But the main reason we want to look at them, of course, is to create animation that feels a little bit real. I mean, that's what we want. If we can create animation that kind of suggests something in real life, it's suddenly that much more relatable. It's something that can actually invoke an emotional response or something. It's something we see and we're like, oh, I feel like I know this. It seems like it's familiar and useful. But like I said, we don't need to go through all 12. I actually think there's like 3. We can just take like 3 of them, and if we apply those to what we do with motion and web design, we can make our animations about 1,000,000% better, give or take. 1,000,000, billion, 1,000,000, 100, I don't know, a number. But we can definitely improve these, improve our work, our animation work on the web, just by considering 3 of these. That's all it's going to take. So I put together a little example for us. Basically just something really basic, a little modal window coming up. And this one is confirming our reservation at a cat cafe, which you may think is a made-up thing, but it's not. They're real. There's one opening in San Francisco. They're hiring right now. Totally not joking. I saw it on Twitter. But this is just like a basic modal window. It's kind of the thing of what you would just be like, hey, you confirmed your reservation. Here's your modal. Confirmation, done. It's just kind of like, here I am. And in a lot of cases, we could stop right here. We're like, hey, I made the modal, animated, I'm done. What's next? But I think we can make it a whole lot better. So to take a look at where we're starting from, we have some stuff going on behind the scenes, some code stuff. We have an animation that's making our actual box come in, and he's got 2 things going on with him. He's both sliding in and fading in. They're timed slightly differently, so the fade in is short and the slide in is big. So he's like, fade, 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 slide, yay. Well, we haven't got the yay part in yet, but we're going for yay. And then we have our slide-in keyframes that run the slide-in, and we have the fade-in keyframes that run the fade-in. Really complex animation going on here. If you were in Sarah's talk yesterday, you're like, what are you even doing? But we can get a lot done with these tiny bits of keyframes. So let's look at 3 principles that we can actually apply to this to make it have a little bit more, just be designed, have some energy, have something that might actually match the fact that we're going to go hang out with cats and drink tea like old ladies. No? All right, whatever. By the end of this talk, at least one of you will join me at the cat cafe. No, it's good. So the first principle I want to look at is timing and spacing. There's lots of fun sayings about how timing is everything in comedy. It's also the key to animation. Timing is basically the one thing, if you can get down and can learn how to do well, you're going to be a better animator than pretty much every other designer you know. That's the good part of it. The hard part is there's no one right way to do timing. You have to just try it out a lot and then get an eye for it and kind of practice it because it's an art. But timing and spacing are the 2 biggest ones. And essentially, I mean, don't tell anyone, but the other 11 principles are basically just variations of this one. So timing is the amount of time it takes for something to happen. It's kind of like, for us, the duration of an animation. And you're like, OK, timing is how long it takes to happen. That's cool. And it's usually for each individual action. A lot of the times, this is demonstrated by kind of breaking down an animation of a bouncing ball. And I figure if that's good enough for Richard Williams, who wrote the Animator's Survival Guide, it's good enough for me, too. So I animated a bouncing ball for you all. You want to see it? OK, good. If you said no, I don't know what I'd do. Oh, wait, let's do that again, because I was talking through it. But yeah, bouncing ball. Right? Kind of looks So it's a bouncing ball. You've seen that before. But if we were going to take that animation and then mark out the timing, we'd end up with something like this, where we actually mark the timing of each part of the action. So the dunk, dunk, dunk. So the timing of our animation is kind of like the dunk, dunk, dunk. That's our timing. Each time the ball hits the ground, it's like going a little slower because of like gravity and physics and all that silly stuff. And each time it goes a little less high because gravity and all that stuff. But the timing is those kind of little stops, those little bit of rhythm to it. Spacing goes hand in hand with timing because it describes how it makes that movement. Spacing is the changes in speed over time. It gets its name from when you were drawing frame-by-frame animation back in the day, it was how far you spaced out your frames. Generally, we're not doing frame-by-frame animation. I mean, maybe you are, but probably most of the time we're not. So for us, it's more the changes in speed. But they're really the same thing, just said a different way. So if we wanted to mark the spacing of our amazing bouncing ball animation, which is like the best animation you've ever seen, we would just basically take a little freeze frame of each frame as it goes through this animation. And that would look something like this. So we have each individual frame, and as it goes, it's like when it's falling and going really fast, the frames are spaced further apart, more spacing, faster motion. And then when it gets to like the top of that peak, it's like, oh, gravity, oh, what am I going to do? Oh, it goes a little slower, and its frames are closer together. And then we have the same thing as it drops, and eventually, poor ball just has no inertia left and just kind of rolls off the screen. But that's how we get spacing. And for us, timing and spacing are, the reason they're so important is they give the idea, or kind of fake the idea of physics, give the idea of an object obeying the law of physics, which are things we tend to deal with in real life, like basically all the time. Crazy. And the bigger thing for us even, since we're often not really replicating true physics, right? Like you're not like, oh wait, what's the force of gravity now? We're more or less kind of trying to invoke the idea of real physics versus actually modeling it. So for us, when we're dealing with interfaces, a lot of what timing and spacing gives us is this idea of emotion and mood and reaction. Because when we see something move, we have this tendency to assign reasons for why it moved. And a lot of those times those are like personality, like, oh, it's just all floaty and happy. That's why it's like, yay. Or you're like, if it's going really fast, you're like, oh, something must have hit it. Or that's how things work in the real world. And we apply that to things we see on screen as well. When we see it move, we try to interpret why it's moving and what it's doing. And we kind of can't help it, so that's really cool. It's like all design things. It's like when you see certain colors, it invokes certain emotions. When you see certain efforts at hierarchy, it evokes certain things. Timing and spacing, very much the same way. But for us, timing is duration, like I said, and spacing is easing. And you're like, okay, cool, that's pretty awesome. So timing and spacing are super important. Timing is duration, got that. That's like a CSS, property. And then spacing is easing. Like, cool, we can set easing in CSS. We have these 5 options. Yay! No, you're like, wait, so I can make it linear, which actually doesn't count because nothing in real life can move as linear animation. It's basically robotic and mechanical, and it doesn't really count. So we have ease in and ease out and ease in out. But ease is kind of like a really weird version of ease in out. So really we only have 3. And suddenly our list is getting really short, and then we're like, how are we supposed to do any real animation in CSS? And even if you're dealing with something, if you're doing something with a JavaScript library, a lot of those will have these built-in presets, and you're like, cool. And those presets are usually a really short list, which is why we have our friend, the cubic Bezier function. Or when I first met him, I like to call him number barf. Because you look at that and you're like, right then, what does that mean? No, those don't mean anything to me. And if you're super into data or graphs, you might be like, oh, I got it, 4 numbers, 2 XY coordinates, sweet, done. But you're also like, wait, it still doesn't help me very much. So the easiest way to interpret these cubic Bezier functions is actually with an easing graph or a motion graph, which plots the progression of our animation against time. So suddenly this is something we can actually look at and be like, I feel like I can make more sense of this, not just memorizing numbers. And the 2 XY coordinates are these 2 here. And it's basically like a kind of really stripped down version of Illustrator, where you can drag those control points to different XY coordinates and affect the shape of the curve. The start is always fixed because your animation has to start. I mean, we can get into some philosophical conversations about whether the animation really starts, but it has to start. And it also has to end at some point in time. You might, you can make it really long and maybe you will die before your animation ends, but your animation will end. So those points are fixed. That took a very morbid turn, I'm sorry. But we can affect the shape of the curve in between. And where that curve is steepest, things are going fastest. And where it's like the most level or kind of horizontal, that's where things are going slowest. So this one here obviously starts a little bit slow, ramps up and goes fast, and then goes slow again. Conveniently like an ease in out. But of course, we can change the shape of this graph, and there's like probably a million or something like that. I'm trying not to exaggerate, but it's really hard. I was going to say a billion thousand, but then I changed to a million for you. But there's a lot of variations we can have of how short that initial like slow ramp up to speed is, or how fast that gets, how steep it gets. And we can even adjust these handles to have that curve bust out of the graph. So there's a lot of options there, a ton of options for easing, and every single one of them is just a little bit different than the next and says something just a little different. So people who call themselves motion designers, as like full-time motion design people who work in After Effects, they would never, ever like give any animation to their client if they didn't go into their graph view of things. Like this is just where people who are motion designers work. So if they wouldn't do it, why should we do it? We should also be dealing with a graph view as much as possible. Our graphs, thankfully, are a lot easier to understand than this, because this is like, huh? We just have to deal with one at a time. We got it easy. But the moral of the story is everything is better with cubic Beziers. Pizza, ice cream, anything. Everything is better than with cubic Beziers. Whew, I almost said that totally wrong. So in true cooking show style, or rather, to apply timing and spacing to our example, I went all cooking show style on you and picked a cubic Bezier curve for us to deal with without, just kind of skipping to it. Maybe? OK, there we go. So most of the time, you'd probably, well, actually, all the time, you wouldn't just be like, and I like that curve. You usually have something you want to say with it. For this one, I want it to have more energy. I'm like, you know what? Right now, our reservation is like, here's your reservation. Not exciting enough. I want something that's like, here's your reservation, cats! That's what I wanted to say. That approximately translates to this cubic Bezier curve. Yeah, like I said, an art, not a science. But I decided I wanted this one, and I'm purposely picking one that's going outside of the top, because that's going to give me a little bit more of an energetic feel. So I picked that one, and then I went and pasted it into my code. See how easy this is? It's like, that's all it takes. Instead of just writing ease, you're like, copy and paste cubic Bezier, done. And for some reason, I have 2 slides of that, in case you're like, do you see the difference? There's no difference. And then with that cubic Bezier function, just added into the easing of our slide-in animation. That's all we did. Just added it into our box's motion. We end up with something, oh wait, sorry, the before to compare. Here's our before. Not bad, it's there. And then our after is more like this. I should maybe make it play. So now we've just got that little bit more energy to it, where it's like, hey, here's your reservation. And it's just, we didn't change the duration. All we changed was the spacing. We didn't even touch the timing yet. We've already got something that feels different, feels like it has more energy. And conveniently, because I like to be tricky, by picking a curve that went out of the box at the top at the end and it kind of overshot our destination and then settled into place, I also have us using the animation principle of follow-through. Pretty fun, right? It totally tricked you, where you did 2 in 1. That's how easy this stuff can be. And follow-through is basically the idea that not everything stops at once. There's a really fun story in The Illusions of Life that talk about how Walt Disney was watching the dailies that his animators had put together. And I don't know if he said they were good first or not, but he was like, guys, not everything stops at once. And I can just imagine him then just leaving, and they're all like, oh no, what do we do? Walt hates them. They came up with the principle of follow-through. And it's really true in real life. Nothing actually stops all at once. The classic kind of diagram is the bulldog with the crazy, wobbly cheeks. If he turns his head, his cheeks are like, blub, 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 and then they finally stop. So follow-through can be really mushy and bulldog cheeks. Follow-through can also be a lot more rigid. It's really anything that has so much energy that it goes past its destination and then falls into place. So like our Roadrunner guy, he's got some follow-through in a very different way than our bulldog cheeks, where he's just like, so birdseed, yay. But it's also follow-through. So for us, since we're not really doing things like, Roadrunners with feathers and poofy things and dust, or bulldogs with crazy cheeks. I mean, maybe that's the interface of your website, but that's weird, just so you know. Dog faces, strange interface. So we're not really dealing with appendages and floppy cheeks, but we are dealing with things that can have so much energy, they go past their target position and then come back into place. So for us, follow-through is mostly overshooting the target position, because a lot of the time we just don't have these extra bits, and that's totally cool. So again, we did it with this curve, and in case you forgot what it looks like, that curve made it do this. Yay. So we're already doing a little bit better. Like even now, the button kind of fading in below, suddenly we have this like kind of path for your eye to follow. It's going like up and back down, as opposed to before it was kind of up and you're like, what just happened down there? I don't even know. So this is adding a little energy and helping you follow it with your eye. Cool. So we've only got one more left. I said we were going to do 3, and we just did 2 at once. There's only one more, which is secondary action. And this is one we tend to ignore this so much when it comes to web animation. We kind of assume that everything we are animating is like this solid container, and all of its child elements, all of the things that go with it are just like stuck to it and it can't move. Like if you think of any carousel or slideshow thing you've seen, you'll see things just kind of like move into place, and then they're here, and they move out, and the next one moves in. And they might all be like a photo with like text and a button, or they have parts, but they still all are just like, I'm here, I'm gone, I'm here. And you're like, what if we just gave those a little more life and had them move a little more organically? And secondary action is one of the ways we can do that. It's basically any supplemental action that reinforces the main action. So anything that's kind of happening, along the way to kind of support what's happening, a lot of time it sort of exaggerates what's happening. If you think of like the favorite star on Twitter, it has all those little bursty things that come off that sort of, give that idea of the star scaling up just a little bit more like power and exaggeration to it. So I thought we'd actually do this one for real, and I'll show you we're going to add some secondary action to our little modal. The main plan I want to do is to actually have our little paragraph and the date and title kind of move a little differently than its container. And I thought since it's 9:21 in the morning, why not live code that? That's not risky or anything. It's totally cool. Nothing bad could possibly happen. I just remember 2 keyboard shortcuts in a row, so we're on a good roll. So this is where our guy is starting out. We just saw him, and I think, let's see, make sure he's in the same place we were. Yeah, so that's exactly like we saw on the slide. We've got our little follow-through going on. Kitten looks kind of happy. I don't know, he looks sort of happy to see us. We'll pretend he is. This is our code behind it, which looks just like the slide I showed you. Crazy. So if we want to add a little secondary action and get these, I want to take mostly the text, like our description and our date, and just have them like come up behind the main container a little bit, almost like they're like, oh wait, we're coming, okay, here we are. So we sort of want to have a like, da-dum, kind of thing going on. I was never a good drummer, sorry if that was off. So to do that, what I want to do, or the way I'm going to do it, is to create a smaller version of our slide-in animation. So our whole container is like, I'm sliding in, yay! But I want its little child elements to be like, I'm sliding in a tiny bit. So we'll make a tiny slide in. It's really important to use different voices when you're describing your animation. It's really the key. That was a joke. It was supposed to distract you from me not being able to type the word slide in short correctly, but I did, yes. So I'm going to create an animation called slide in short. Very obvious, very verbose. Estelle would totally approve of my animation name, I hope. And I'm going to really just create a very similar animation to the slide in right below it. So I'm going to go from, and I'm going to, oops, we're not going to do a space there. Oh, oops, no, we needed that. This is really how I code, it's crazy. So we're going to do like a transform, and we're going to translate on the y-axis because that's the up and down one. I know it's early, so I figured I'd explain x and y. And we'll do it from a shorter distance. Our current one is going from like 400 pixels down to like all the way to the top. And maybe we'll do like 80 pixels, give or take. That sounds like a good number to me. So I'm going to do 80 pixels down. And then to make it very similar, we'll do a 2, and we'll just, we'll transform that again on the y-axis, a translation on the y-axis rather, of 0, which essentially is like, oh, I want to put in my semicolon, hold on. Basically saying like, go from 80 pixels below where you are right now to where you are right now. Maybe confusing, but it totally works. And then we need to apply this animation to our text and our titles. So I want to apply it to these two together because I feel like they are related content. Like that title and that date, we'll have them go together. And then that description, we'll have it follow just a little bit behind. So we want to have that organic kind of like, yay, feel. I should think of a better word than yay to describe it. Hopefully no one is counting how many times I've said yay. So we're going to apply that to the H2 and the H3. I know that's what they are because I put them there. And we'll give it an animation of slide in short. And we're going to make this guy take 0.3 seconds. I'm going to do it this way with no 0. Hopefully that doesn't bother anyone. Too bad if it does. I'm coding, you're not. And then we're going to make it delay by 0.2 seconds. That global delay variable is really just because I'm excessively refreshing with Google Fonts and live coding it. In real life, you don't need that there. But Google Fonts, sorry. I like them, but they're weird sometimes. And then we're going to give this an easing of ease out custom, which is a variable I created and have further up in my document, and animation fill mode of both because we like our sanity. Actually, more specifically, because I want it to stay there when it goes there. We'll apply the fade in animation as well, because this is what our box was doing, so he has slide in and fade in, so we'll do that too. And I want this one to take half as long as our slide in, because I want it to fade in at the beginning and then finish its slide in, but be visible approximately halfway through its slide in. So 0.15 seconds, we'll do this again, and have it start at the same time. We do want it to delay a little bit, which is why we're delaying it by these 0.2 seconds, because we want our main container to be a little ways up before our child elements start moving, right? Like it's going to get carried with its parent, and then we're like, and you'll do just a little extra. And this one we'll do like ease in quad, which is a pen or easing equation if you're into those things. If you're not, don't worry about it. It's just an ease in that's fancy. And that's kind of it for that one. Then we'll apply it to our paragraph as well, and we'll copy and paste, because it's probably really fun to watch me code, but whatever. Actually, no, I don't want to copy and paste it that way. We'll do it this way. And we'll just take our same animation property that we gave our H2 and H3, give it to our paragraph, but I want to change one thing. Right now, they're going to animate together, right? Our container will go up, and they'll be a little behind, but they'll be as one chunk, and I want them to be like a little bit of a wave, so they're like, da-dum, boom. So I'm going to make these guys be delayed by just 1/10 of a second more by 0.03. And hopefully I have typed nothing wrong. We'll see. Haha. The moment of truth. Does it work? Yay, it works. So we'll do that one more time without me making a weird face. And we've got that little bit of secondary action, just that little bit of a wave to things, where now it's like, doo-doo, here's your thing. So it feels a lot more organic. We've got a lot more energy to it. It feels like it almost has some life. And we're more excited about the cat cafe, right? Okay, because there's like 4 people that are going to come with me. This is the best. So we've created all this extra energy. We've given it some thought. We've designed it. And like this whole time, I mean, yeah, we did this on stage and it took us 20 minutes. But like for you working at your desk at home without a bunch of people watching you code, you could probably do it in like 5 minutes. And we haven't even made this take, like the actually entrance itself, we haven't changed the duration. It's not taking any longer. We've just looked at the details of what it's saying and how it's entering without changing much of anything else, which is pretty darn powerful. If this was a real thing, I would also probably go back and change the timing, adjust the timing to make it a little bit faster. A lot of the time we, oh yeah, in case that code stuff didn't work, but it did, so that's fine. But a lot of the times when we're designing this stuff, we spend so much time looking at those little details. We're like, wait, is the paragraph really behind the title? Is it right? Okay, are they settling back into place? And we obsess over this so much that we kind of lose sight of the bigger picture, and we forget that reading that animation, getting that detail from it as someone using it and observing it, happens in like a fraction of the time it takes us to design it. So you always want to go back and take a look at your timing and just speed it up a little bit here and there, because most of the time it has to be slow for us to design it. It doesn't have to be slow to get the idea of it. And so we'll just skip through that. We saw him. Yep, same thing. So that was really cool, but that's just one modal window, Val. What about the rest of it? I'm talking to myself, but that's okay. I was pretending that's what you're asking me. What about when we have more than one thing moving in our site or application? Like, we probably aren't going to spend the time to only animate one thing in our entire project. I mean, maybe, but chances are, if you're making this part of your design language, if you're making it part of your design effort, you got a little more to say than just one modal window. So let's take a look at the bigger picture and the idea of like, how do we make sure if we have a bunch of different animations, how do we get them to go together in a way that makes sense? How do we make sure we're designing them all, but not making all this individual excessive effort, and then at the end going through and being like, none of these look like they're related. This is awful. So the main way we do that is to look at choreography. And it's totally the same kind of choreography as like dancing. So like, it's kind of like last night when we were dancing with sharks, but if we had a plan. If we were trying to coordinate that. I don't know, the sharks are pretty good at dancing though. They might have had a choreographer. I think they did. But if we want to choreograph our animations, we want to make sure that all of our UI animations have something related. They have some common thread, some common message, a common look. Because we don't know where people are going to start using our site or application or whatever we're working on. People don't all come to our homepage and then oh, maybe I'll go look at the About Us. Maybe I'll look at this. People come in and start their experience from anywhere. They might put down their laptop and go finish looking at your site on their phone. And then how do you make sure that's similar? I mean, this is a pretty common challenge we have these days. And animation is one of the ways we can make these connect. If you have a common set of rules you're using across all your screen sizes, suddenly you have a related thread that pulls these together. So some things to keep in mind for choreography, things to make your choreography feel like it actually is choreographed, like you were thinking about this. I have a few tips. So the first is that similar objects should animate in similar ways. If you have things that are there for similar content reasons, for example, maybe you have 2 or 3 layers of navigation, but they're all navigation, so they're very related. Maybe you have, in this example, there are some thumbnails and a bigger detail view. Well, the thumbnails are all thumbnails, so shouldn't they all move the same way? Kind of makes sense. So you want to aim for things more like that, where you're okay, thumbnails slide in on the x-axis, cool. They're a little offset, they got a little bit of a fun vibe going to them, a little bit of energy there, a little bit of style. But that makes a lot more sense than something like this, where you're are these all different because they all move differently? Are they all the same thing? I don't know anymore. And it gets a little confusing. So having things that are there for a similar purpose, have similar content, move in a similar way, just reinforces their relationship to each other and the fact that you're dealing with the same thing. It's a really good place to go. Entrances should inform exits, and that's really hard to say. If you were dealing with things like actors on a stage, most of the time, actors that come out from one place go back the same way they came in just kind of a logical sort of thing, oh, she came from over there, and then she went back out that way. So things that work more like this are having them be related. So it came in from the bottom, and then went back down to the bottom. It's just hey, I'm here, now I'm gone. Makes sense. And it also gives you that idea of kind of orienting you to the interface itself and being oh, modals are down there where I can't see them. It'll come up when it needs to tell me something. But a lot of the time we see stuff more like this, which is a lot less consistent. Where you're cool, wait, what? And my bank does this, and it drives me totally crazy. It takes 3 steps to transfer money from one account to another, which is enough to make me angry to begin with. But they had this great idea. They're oh, there's these 3 steps. All 3 of these screens have numbers and form fields, and they all look really similar. So, what if we use animation to make it clear when you change steps? Totally good purpose for animation. Letting you know that you're going through steps, that the screen you're looking at has changed. Awesome, good job, bank. But the way they do it is this. They're here's step 1. You're okay, form field, blah. And then step 1's woohoo, out the top. And then step 2 slides in on this crazy 3D rotation. You're just what the hell happened? And then step 2, once you're done with those form fields, is whatever. And step 3 comes in from here. And you're if you had just done this, it would have made so much sense. So they had a perfect purpose for adding animation and for using motion. And then they destroyed it by having terrible style and terrible choreography. So don't be like my bank. And also, why does it take 3 steps? But anyways, so having those exits inform entrances, and it's not always that things must always go from where they came from, but if they go out in a different direction than they came in, there should be a reason. And just having 3 million ways to flip stuff in is not a good enough reason. Matching velocities is a really good way to make animations feel related and feel like they're all coming from the same animation family. And it's a little tough to do because we often get so stuck on durations, right? You've probably read some articles that are all UI animations on the web should be 0.3 seconds all the time, no matter what. If they're longer, you're dumb. I don't know if there's an actual article that says that, but I should write it if not, just so I can make fun of myself. But there's this obsession with duration and how fast it should be, and that there should be a number value for how fast, and that's the main thing. But really, animation is more of an art than that. It's more of the feel and what it's saying, what we've been talking about this whole morning so far. So if you match velocities instead of durations, when things move a bigger distance, they still feel like they're having the same amount of speed, they're reaching the same top speed, they feel related. Kind of like these 2 boxes, where you're yay, he moved more than twice as far as bottom box did, but his top velocity was similar. He didn't get any faster. He just used the same type of speed, essentially, to get a little further. But if you contrast that with something like this, where you're like, oh, wait, what? Their durations are the same. Can we do that again? Well, that one? Oh, just one. So those two, their durations are the same, even though it's covering lots more ground, and suddenly bottom box just feels like he's doing something completely different than top box, because he went a lot faster, and if we match the velocities instead of the durations, they'd feel a lot more related. This one happens a lot in a horizontal way, where PayPal does it. I need to find some examples that don't involve me like showing you all of my financial information, so I can just not act them out, but show them to you. PayPal does this now. They finally caught on. They finally got it in 1995 and made something that looks like it might be from this year. They've done a really great redesign, and they do this thing where they expand your transaction details. But sometimes your transaction details are this long, and sometimes they're this long. But the same duration guides that expanding animation. So sometimes you're like, oh, transaction details, and it's like, boom. And then you're like, transaction details on the next one, and it's like, blah. And that just feels so weird. It doesn't actually make those sounds, but it will. If anyone here works for PayPal and wants me to do some sound design for you, I'm available. Not really. I mean, maybe? Actually, I don't know if I'm serious about that. Huh. Anyways, we often talk about choreography, about being consistent, of being like, consistent choreography is key, consistent, consistent, consistent. And it sounds really cool, but we can also aim for choreography that's cohesive. And mostly I said this to be a tongue twister, because like you want cohesive choreography instead of consistent choreography. Wow, she's good at C's. But if we stick with the idea of cohesive over consistent, we have a little bit more leeway, and we can make things feel a little bit more, instead of like really rigid and mechanical, a little bit more human. So for example, this would be consistent choreography, where this is the Nixon Watches site, and all of their animation, all of their navigation, is animated, and they use the exact same duration and the exact same easing. It's all like 0.2 seconds ease in out for every single thing, and it's all just like bloom, bloom, bloom. And it's awesome because it's all right there when you want it. You're never waiting for the animation. It's all right there, the navigation to show up. It's all right there. They use the same animation on their little search box, their cart, everything. It's great, but it's all exactly the same. So it's just like dun, 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 dun. Very mechanical. But they make watches, so it kind of makes sense, right? Yeah, that was a bad one, sorry. But it's like got that mechanical consistency to it, but it totally works for them. Not everything has to be that super exactly the same consistent. If you look at something like a swarm, which I've recently found out nobody uses except for me and my neighbors, but that's okay. They have very different feel to their animation. It's actually like compared to Nixon, very exaggerated, totally over the top. It's all like blum, 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 here's your modal box, yay. But that same like blup thing that their modals come down with, they use that same feel for this little loader when you're saying how close you've gotten to your badge. So it's like modal window, and then it's like loader. And it has that same feel, even though it's not timed exactly the same. The easing might be similar, but the duration is different. So the consistency, or the cohesiveness versus the consistency, is really hard to say still. But having these things feel related versus be exactly the same can give you almost a better feeling of choreography. I talked about choreography excessively on my podcast with Kenneth called Motion and Meaning, and we talked about it for like half an hour. So if you wanted to listen to two people talk about choreography excessively, this is your podcast episode. Yeah, I'm sure everyone's like, that's exactly what I wanted this morning. Thank you. But once we have this kind of overall system, or this idea of like, hey, we want our animations to all feel like they belong together, like they're a family, that's not always in the same way that considering your animations as a group is a better idea than just like designing each individual one and ignoring everything else. Having some way of documenting and knowing what it is that you want to say with your animations is a really good idea too. And a lot of that comes down to trying to figure out, how do I express my brand or tell my story with motion? Like you might be like, oh, we are a really old-timey brand, so we're going to use some really, like humanist serifs for all of our typeface, because that will be from the same era of this thing we're trying to suggest. And that was the worst typography example ever, but it's okay. It's early. Like you have these reasons for picking your type. You have these reasons for picking the colors that you use. Like we should have the same reasons for picking the motion that we use or the animation we use. It should be the same thing. So figuring out how it is you want to express your brand in motion, I've kind of narrowed it down to 3 different approaches we can take to it. You can start with your main interaction, the main thing that people are coming to your site or to your product to do, and figure out how that should animate. Just be like, how can I add animation to this, or can I add animation to this? The answer might be no, but for now we're going to pretend it is, because otherwise I won't be able to talk about the rest of my talk, and that'd be weird. So you can be like, where can I add animation to make this task easier? How can I make it flow better with animation? Where can I add feedback? Where can I add some sort of hierarchy with motion? Narrow that down, and then whatever decisions you make for that main interaction, just kind of add it in little bits further in other places of your product as well. And then it's all based on that one example, so that will give you that choreography and give you that messaging. You can look for real-world things to exemplify. We'll look at an example from IBM too, where they were like, hey, our company used to make like big giant computers that took up like entire rooms. Those moved. What if we made our interface animations move like those things we used to make, and then we're like invoking the history of our company, and it's like this crazy thing. How cool is that? Totally cool. You can also match your motion ideas to the same like adjectives you use to describe your brand or your design anyways, right? Like we usually have some way we describe our brand, whether it's going full out to like having a design philosophy or just being like, we are a fun, fresh, energetic brand. Some of those words maybe don't mean a whole lot, but we can apply them to motion just as much as we can to color or type or anything else. So a couple examples of this list. I talked about IBM. There's some folks here from IBM, and this is their machines in motion, where they're like, hey, we used to make this old stuff. Let's make our new stuff move like our old stuff. And they actually go through and kind of show things side by side of like how they're, how all these objects moving in and out emulate a typewriter and like a hole punch and all this kind of stuff. I guess that's not a hole punch. It's a very fancy hole punch. I don't know old computers. But it's a really it's a good way to tie it into the history of their company, and that's the rules they've decided to govern their motion with. They're like, when we make things move, it has to follow one of these machines in motion principles, and here's what they are, here's why they are the way they are. And then suddenly your decisions are so much easier to make. Really similar to what Gina was talking about yesterday, of just having these rules that govern your decisions, and suddenly you make decisions that all make sense together, and all you did was like think about it a little. So we can go for adjectives, things like you might describe your brand as like friendly, sleek, strong, playful. All these crazy words we use to describe our story or a company or a product, those can get applied to motion too. So we can do things like, we looked at follow through with our little modal box, and we were like, that adds a lot more energy. If you want to get even crazier, you can add things like bounciness and everything else. But that overshooting or anticipation being like this kind of like winding up and getting ready to move, that conveys more energy. It feels more energetic. And I have a little example over here where it's like friendlier, it's bolder, especially like if you're mirroring your anticipation and follow through where you're like, I'm getting ready, I moved, and I went too far, and then I came back. It's like very energetic. It can feel very friendly, and can feel very bold because it's a little in your face. And if you employ things like squash and stretch, you can create things that have a lot of extra energy and also playfulness. And squash and stretch is the idea that these things are made of, are kind of, they can be mushed around a little bit, and as they move, they might stretch or squish or whatever. And I guess I could just play the video instead of describing it. But my acting it out was very similar to that animation, right? Good. You can just adding that little bit of squash and stretch just changes the way that little circle coming in appears, the whole energy of it. Feels more playful, especially when you get super squashy and stretchy and bouncy, it can start looking really childish. But using just little bits of it here and there can be really, really effective. It's one of the hardest ones to do well, but when you do, holy crap, it is awesome. Kind of on the flip side of those, things that are more like ease in outs, where it's like you start slow, you go fast, and then you settle back into place. You're like, has a more balanced and kind of calm feel to it. It's very measured. It's usually very symmetrical, or you can make it very symmetrical, where you're like, I start slow, I go fast, and then I start slow again. And if all of your stuff kind of has that wave to it, things feel very balanced and measured. I should remember to play these videos instead of dancing it out, but that's okay. I just didn't dance enough last night. Even taking that a little bit further, things that are smaller movements can feel very calm and subtle. Like not adding motion to your interfaces and to your designs does not mean everything has to be like, whoa, coming in and out from everywhere. It can be a lot more subtle than that. It can be very small movements, just little bits here and there. Suggesting movement versus like making it a giant movement works really well and is very effective. And those smaller movements just feel a bit more calm, a bit more subtle. You cannot move at all and just stick with things like opacity and blurs. And then you've got this kind of like more subdued, soft, and stable look to things, where you're just like, oh, fading in and out. I'm in the same place, but I'm fading in and out. It has a very different feel to things. And of course, you can combine them. And there's tons more ways you can interpret motion to kind of labeling it of the energy and stuff it gives. That's just a short list of things and kind of a good start, because we don't often do that. You see things and they move and you're like, oh, I interpret something from that, but we don't always go and kind of try to nail it down of what exactly it was. And I would say to keep going on that is to aim to add your own, to develop your own animation library. Like once you have your idea of like what you want to say in motion, actually kind of write down, or not actually write down, but save and record some of these ones that you use all the time. Because there are ones you're going to use all the time. Even when I was just making that little modal guy, I used fade in like 4 times, 3 times, something like that. There's things you're going to use over and over, and why should you have to reinvent the wheel every single time? So the kind of things you might want to document, you can start by documenting like the categories of animations that you use. Like maybe your rules could be, hey, we're only going to use animations for things that have, when they enter and exit, that's it. It's the only place we're going to use motion. That's how we are defining motion for our brand. Cool. You might only be using animation to give feedback, which is defining it very much by its purpose. But you might be like, hey, we only use animation when we want to give people feedback of some interaction they've had, and you can use it that way. So there's so many kind of categories of animation. There are different ways, or reasons you can use animation, and you can just kind of narrow off that list. You don't have to use them all. You could use just a few, and it would be completely okay. No one will hold it against you, I promise. Or maybe we will. No, I'm just kidding, I won't. Cool. Keynote's doing some weird stuff. Another way you can document your animations is by actually documenting your building blocks. If you are deciding like, hey, you might take a different approach, and instead of defining the reasons you use animation, just be like, when we do animate things, we're going to animate the opacity and the position, and that's it. That's all we'll animate. You can even have little examples of how you would do this, and kind of getting to these very specific examples of how you would animate the opacity and that kind of thing. So there's a lot of things you can do to make this decision process easier for yourself and more consistent for yourself. You're making these decisions ahead of time. Like Gina was saying yesterday, if you take the time to define this stuff, like, hey, our brand in motion is going to be very energetic, so we'll use a lot of follow-through, and we're going to use animation only for entrances and exits. And when we do, we're also going to have it fade in and be doing animating position and opacity. And that can be enough rules to just add animation to your entire project. So lots of stuff there. But to kind of bring it all into one thing, the biggest thing to do to get better at designing motion, to be better designers with motion, is to look at good motion, right? Like the same way that by looking at good design and seeing good design in the wild, we get better at design and kind of increase our taste level of design, you want to do the same thing with motion. The more you look at really good motion, the better you're going to get at making it. It's just going to happen. Plus, there's some really cool places to look at motion. One of my favorites is Art of the Title, which is a site completely dedicated to kind of the behind-the-scenes design stories of all the titles for movies and TV shows, some of which are totally amazing. They cover ones all the way back from the Saul Bass days. Every once in a while, they do a Saul Bass feature, and then all day you're just like, oh, this is the best ever. Love this site. And they talk to the designers behind these titles, and they ask them why they made it the way they did it. And the really interesting thing is a lot of the time these designers are like, oh, well, I started with type and color, and I had a story to tell and a thing to say. And you're like, that's what I start with. Oh my God, we're the same. Yay. So there's a lot you can learn from those. It's a great site. Another place to look that can give you a lot of inspiration as well is at apps. Native apps have been doing this motion thing for ages. Like it or not, they kind of have better tools than we do right now, but they also had a head start, so we're okay, it's fine. But they've been doing this a lot longer. Some of the decisions they make are really good. Some of them aren't so good. You should totally have opinions over who does it well and who doesn't and why. Captivate.co, really annoyingly spelled website. There are 2 P's. I spell it wrong every single time. The girl that runs this gallery always puts in more than one little video from each application. So you can get an idea, instead of just looking at a one-off thing like, oh, that button spins, it's awesome, it's beautiful. You can take a look at more than one interaction within one application, and you can start deciding for yourself, like, does that make sense? Is there some choreography here? Do these fit together? Do I like them? Would I do this? Great stuff. So those are some good places to look at things. So yeah, those are two ones, apps and titles. Very good places to look at stuff. And also Vimeo has so much good, like, straight up motion design. It's kind of, you could lose days to that. It's beautiful. But mostly, I just wanted to remind everyone, or actually no, that's a terrible way to start this. I started out this morning by telling you all you have the power to change the way people think about web animation, and it's totally true. We've ditched the skip intro era. We've stopped making that crazy, terrible stuff. We've stopped having to fight Flash to, like, work in a browser and not do dumb stuff. We can make things that are beautiful, functional, have a purpose, are accessible, are progressively enhanced, and responsive. We are basically the best medium ever, and we have this opportunity to make amazing things and just change the face of what animation means on the web. So I hope you guys are excited about that as I am. I think it's super exciting, and I can't wait to see where this all goes. Our tools keep getting better, like, practically every day. Specs are improved, browser support is improved, our job gets easier and easier. All we have to do is just make it amazing, and I think we are, like, all of you are totally well equipped for that. So I'm excited to see what you guys all do with it. If you want to talk more about web animation, which I always want to do, I have a newsletter called UI Animation Newsletter where I talk about this stuff constantly. If you're into it, you should totally sign up, and you can listen, well, not listen to me, but see me dance things and type things out for you. Yeah, so I hope you guys are excited about web animation too, and thanks very much.